Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. Look at what the postman just delivered at my doorstep. This is something that I bought off of eBay, and I typically don't buy a lot of stuff on eBay, especially not retro computers. But this one I couldn't resist. It was only 15 euros, and okay, it wasn't in a working state, but I figured it might be a cool project. And here we go. It is the Olivetti M300-02. So let's put her on the bench and take a closer look. And here she is, ladies and gentlemen, the Olivetti M300-02 desktop PC. In my humble opinion, it has kind of an iconic look and feel to it. The design is very recognizable. It screams Olivetti, and it really stands out from a crowd of the other beige desktop PCs. So there's really nothing much to it. It has a power button, a 3.5-inch disk drive, a hard drive LED, and the Olivetti badge. That's basically it. Moving to the back, we have the power supply fan, we have the power connectors, two PS2 ports, we have a serial port, a parallel port, and we have the VGA connector. There's also room for two ISA cards in the back, so it probably has some kind of riser card, so we'll see that in a bit. Now to open up the case, there's this little hinge here that you need to pull, and then you can slide the case right on out. So you pull the lever here, and then you kind of push the case outwards, and then it should come right off. So it has a pretty basic layout as you would expect. It has a 3.5-inch disk drive. It has room for a 5.25-inch device. It has a hard drive. It has a weird power button mechanism. The second one kind of slides inwards and outwards. So we have the power supply, and beneath here we have the motherboard. So let's turn it around a bit. So it's a very slim desktop PC. I really like the look and feel to it. On the back, yeah, nothing special here. And on the side, behind this plastic cover, we have the main board. Here we have the PC speaker. But let's see what happens when we turn it on. Again, this PC was sold as being non-working. So I was a bit surprised that when I turned it on, the power supply fan kicked in. And I got something on the screen, but it immediately disappeared. And the PC was kind of in this infinite reboot cycle, where it would count the memory up to 1 megabyte, and then it would kind of reset itself. So I also noticed that it started in 40 column mode, which is a bit weird for a 386. So I was thinking maybe a battery issue, and the fact that it's constantly rebooting is definitely not a good sign. And to make matters worse, the second time I tried to boot the PC, it didn't do anything at all. Nothing came on the screen, the PC speaker didn't make a sound, so yeah. That was kind of a bummer, but hey, what do you expect if you buy a non-working PC off of eBay? But let's take a closer look at the PC and see what we can do about that. And let's start with this power button. So you push it in to start the PC, but then you have this second slider thingy there that you can slide on to the right, which will then hold the power button in place. So when you slide it to the right, you cannot push the power button anymore. So you slide it back to the left, you can turn off the PC. So yeah, pretty strange mechanism there, probably something Italian. We need to figure out what the purpose of this thing is. So at the bottom here of the PC, you have the mechanism that holds the case in place, and the little handle here on the back that you can use to pull the case cover off. So let's get this plastic cover off so that we can access the main board. Now this computer is full of plastic bits and clips and hinges that can easily break off. Really not fond of cases like that, but what are you gonna do? And here we have a view of the main board with the riser card sitting on top of it. Seems to include a coin cell battery also. Not really removable, but we'll look at that in more detail. To get the motherboard out of the PC, there's one screw that we need to remove here at the bottom. It's also protected by this plasticky cover here. On the front of the PC, we have this plastic bit here that holds the PC speaker in place and also acts as kind of a frame for a small PCB that contains the PC speaker connector and the hard drive LED. So let's take off that plastic frame here. It is held in place by a bunch of clips, and there's this black clip here that we need to remove so that we can actually bend the final plastic clip in order to get the frame out of the case. And once that's out of the way, we have this small PCB here, which is connected to the riser card with this ribbon cable. It contains some capacitors, it contains the hard drive LED, and also the PC speaker connector. And with that out of the way, we have access to all the screws that hold the floppy drive in place. So let's go ahead and slide it on out, disconnect the cables, and as you can see, it's a very slim disk drive. This one is made by Epson. It's a standard 1.44 megabyte disk drive, standard floppy drive connector and power connector. And with the floppy drive out of the way, we can access the awkwardly placed screws on the hard drive to get that one out. So let's slide it on out and get some of the cables out of the way. And this is a Conner CP384E, which is an 84 megabyte IDE hard drive. And Conner was one of those brands that was very common in these branded PCs in the early 90s, like Hyundai or Olivetti and the likes. Now back to the motherboard. So like I said, there's only one screw to remove here at the bottom. So let's go ahead and do that. But then, as is often the case with these kind of desktop cases, the motherboard is also held in place by the connectors here at the back. So we'll go ahead and remove those as well. And after that, the board should come right off. It does take a little bit of wiggling here because there is this strip here sitting between the case and the motherboard connectors. We also have the IDE cables from the hard drive and the floppy drive attached to the motherboard, so let's go ahead and remove those as well. And then we can get a clear view of this motherboard. Not really sure what the letter F on this board means. Hope it doesn't stand for failure or something. But let's take a closer look. So we have a riser card with a battery, two ISA slots, welded battery here, so it's not easily removable. We have the floppy drive connector, hard drive connector. On the outside here we have two PS2 connectors. We have a serial port, parallel port, and a VGA port. The riser card takes a little bit of force to get off. It is a huge connector here on the motherboard, but after some wiggling we can get it out. So let's go over the various bits and pieces here. The processing power is provided by this Intel CPU, the 386 SX25 MHz CPU. It has an optional math coprocessor, which is not socketed here. We also have the onboard floppy drive controller and the hard drive controller. It was very common for these types of desktop PCs to have integrated IDE controllers and floppy controllers. We also have this chip here, which I guess is the keyboard controller for this computer. We have an Acer chip on the main board, and this is the I/O chip, so this one handles the floppy drive and hard drive. Here we have the riser connector. And the riser card that goes with it not only carries the two ISA slots, but it also has a battery. It has the power input that comes from the power supply unit, and it also has this connector for the front panel LED and PC speaker. Now the battery on this card isn't your typical CR2032 coin cell battery, but rather it's this CR2450 form factor, which is slightly bigger than the regular coin cell. And not only that, this is not a removable battery. As you can see, it's kind of welded down, and you need to completely desolder the battery if you want to replace it or remove it. So here you can see that it's using a technique called tap welding to hold the leads in place that you can then use to put them on a PCB. Moving along, we have the BIOS chip on the main board. So this is version 5.01, made specifically for this M300. We have a Western Digital chip here, and this Western Digital is in fact the video chip. And here we have some video memory alongside two empty sockets to further upgrade the video memory. And we also have a feature connector for the video card. The chipset is provided by VLSI, a very popular chipset manufacturer from back in the day, used in a lot of 286 and 386 PCs. And finally, we have the memory on this main board. As you can see, there is a bank where a SIM module is kind of soldered onto the main board directly. So this is 2 megabytes of RAM, and it's not using a standard SIM socket, but it's kind of a custom RAM chip that they have created specifically for this main board. But there are 2 empty sockets that you can use to further expand the memory. Now the motherboard is in pretty good shape. One thing I do not like are these kind of early SMD electrolytical capacitors. These have a tendency to leak, and as you can see already here on this one leg, you can see a fair amount of crud already. So I'm guessing that this capacitor has started to leak. This one also. So yeah, this is really typical from this early 90s hardware, where these electrolytic capacitors have a tendency to leak and need to be replaced as soon as possible. I'm not 100% sure that this is causing the reboots, but we'll need to find out. So the capacitors here are definitely something that I'll be looking at replacing. So I am counting 5 of those that might need some attention, so I'll probably go ahead and replace those. Another common culprit in PCs that aren't really working properly is the power supply. Now, first thing I did actually was test the voltage of the power supply, and just by adding the hard drive and the disk drive as a load, that wasn't really sufficient to turn on the hard drive. So I ended up hooking up the main board and then checking the voltages, and they were absolutely fine, so I didn't see any issues with those. So I checked all of the power rails, and the minus 12 volts, the plus 12 volts. The plus 12 volts was a little bit off, but I think still in range. And the 5 volt line was also looking good. So yeah, at the moment I don't suspect that there's an issue with the power supply, but you never know. Another thing that I wanted to look at was the battery here. I know that some computers have issues starting when their battery to power the CMOS is running low. Now this is a battery that you cannot easily replace without desoldering it, but I did check the battery voltage, and the battery voltage here was 2.8, 2.9 volts, which seems to be okay. It should definitely be enough to start the computer. So yeah, I'm not really sure what to think of that either. So in part 2, I'll start the repairs, replacing the capacitors, the battery, and checking for other errors. In the meantime, if any of you guys have any idea what might cause these frequent reboots of the PC during post, I would be very interested in hearing about them in the comments section below. It looks like a fun little PC. I like 386 PCs in general, so I really hope I will be able to get this up and running again. And here, just to show you guys the reboot cycle and what is being shown on the display. And again, it doesn't always do that. Most of the time the screen just remains blank. So I hope to see you guys in part 2 of this series, where hopefully we will be able to get this up and running. Bye bye.